Peach, you're so cool. And with this build, we're gonna rule.
This one is from my one and only true love, Princess Peach.
In order to pull this build off, there's a few things we're going to need. A Bowser playing a piano, a floating island, a spiky collar on that floating island, and a cool space background. Now, I found this really awesome Bowser STL. It even has Jack Black's face. These are all the parts that I'm going to need to print. But before I did that, I took this weird looking shape thing, threw it in Blender, and dug a hole from Bowser's foot through his neck, because we're going to make this guy breathe fire. Next, I threw it in Chi2 box, added the supports, sliced it up, and prepared the models to print. This filled up the build plate, and as you can see, it's going to take about 4.5 hours to print. And I'm going to be using my Phrozen Sonic Muddy 4K paired with some SUNLU standard grade resin. Important safety tip, always wear gloves when handling resin. And just like that, we were off to the races.
We're the Mario Brothers!
Okay, this is the Bowser all printed.
Cool.
Let's see what we got.
Wow.
Pretty cool.
It's like Bowser's melting.
Okay, don't touch. Let's show the camera.
And his head's melting too.
We got one really, really nice print.
I gotta say, this resin produced some really clean and crisp prints.
Now that Bowser's been 3D printed, the next thing we gotta do is wash them in IPA and then cure them under some ultraviolet light.
Then I had to remove it from the supports and assemble this thing. You can see I pulled the wire through his head there, and that's so that we can wire in a really cool flaming effect later.
And then we get to paint them.
The first thing I did was base coat this model in black. Then I stepped up 3 layers of dry brushing until I got to this nice pre-shaded surface. Then it was time to use some speed paints. Of course, I went back in, highlighted up his chest and his spikes and all those bone colored bits on the model. Then, for a shell, I highlighted the spikes in orange and used some Citadel Contrast Warped Lightning to get that green, cool looking shell. Make sure to get the scales highlighted up on his shoulders. And finally, some blood red for his hair and eyebrows.
Now that Bowser's all painted up, we're gonna bring the boys back and get their reaction, see what they think of this paint job. Hey, come on, come look.
Yes. Can you make him breathe fire yet?
We're gonna make them breathe fire soon.
That's a good one. I thought you said the peaches was gonna be bad. That's pretty good.
They're pretty good peaches.
Yeah.
Isn't it?
Why is it so realistic?
A realistic Bowser.
Like it has muscles and all the scales, and it's literally, it looks like blood on his teeth.
Do it? That's his gums.
Did you paint that by
touch.
yourself? How are you so good at that?
Lots of practice.
Wait, he was on a bench?
You can get really good at stuff too if you practice.
Using some reference images, I designed my own spiky collar using Blender, and I think it turned out pretty cool. Now, this thing I printed up on my Langer LK4 printer. I use Ultimaker Cura to slice it. It's going to take about 14 hours, and the print came out perfectly.
Peaches, 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 peaches. Ah! Oh, yeah! Oh!
Now there's one more thing we need to note on this floating island, and that's these spiky bits on the bottom. So we're going to go ahead and use some SM foam and start to carve out this floating island. First, I cut out the basic shape that fit the collar. Once that was good, I marked off the line where it would land, and I went ahead and I cut out some little slots. And the reason I went ahead and did this is because this is where I want to hide even more LED lights, down in this little groove. Then, using my hot foam cutter, I started to carve away and form the basic shape of this island. Glued it in place with some hot glue and continued to carve away at it. Glued on a few extra spiky bits. Marked the dot right here, drilled a hole, and pulled a wire through, and this was to feed some power up to the Bowser model. This is the LED filament we're going to use. I went ahead and glued pink to one side, blue to the other, just like the glowing space scene. Hey, it worked when I tested it out first try. Next up, I mixed some Sculptamold, 50% Sculptamold mix, 50% water, mixed it together, and then applied it all over this foam, and this was to give a more realistic, rocky type texture, and to cover and hide all those wires that I had to wire in.
Peach, understand, I'm gonna love you till the very end.
A few more things to note on the top part here. We got to make a metal bracket and some cracked stone. So I went ahead and just used a ballpoint pin to carve in the floor tiles. Took a piece of aluminum tin, rolled it up, and used this to roll around to make some surface texture on the rocks. Next up, with a simple piece of cardboard, I cut this hexagon pattern. Then, using the ball pen, I push down into it, make these little rivets. This is a great little trick to make rivets on cardboard. Then I mix up some Mod Podge, some Deco Art paints, and got ready to paint this floating island. And I had to call in backup.
Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. What? What?
That's funny.
Yes.
I think I got a little YouTuber in the making there. I also went ahead and painted the top. Then it was time to dry brush up some colors. I'm using some Army Painter Dark Stone. Started with that as a base. Moved up to some ash gray. And then finally the tip of the spikes with some ash gray and white. I repeated that process on the top and it turned out real nice. Now guys, I really want to take a second here and thank all the members of my Patreon. You guys rock. You really helped me bring this channel to new heights. Your continued support pushes me to do even more. So thanks guys. And you can see here the collar was simply painted up using some spray paints, a little bit of airbrush work, finally a little bit of dry brushing, and I decided to add some gold to the spikes. I'm not sure if this is accurate, but I thought it looked pretty cool. And then finally, I glued the metal bracket to the top part of this stone surface.
We're going to use this wooden panel here for the base of the diorama and this canvas panel as the background of the diorama. I'm going to cut this down to size, put these two things together, and paint an outer space scene here.
So this is where my Gaahleiri Air Brushes are going to come in real handy and make the painting of this space scene super simple. Now this is an awesome trick to make stars. Just load up a stiff bristle paintbrush with some paint and just flick it all over there. Next, I move into some gray, just making streaks like a galaxy. And try to capture that look, I went ahead and used some blue and pink on the left and right sides of this painting. And for somebody who don't really know what they're doing, this little painting turned out really cool. Then for the base, I marked out the center point, measured a line just off center because this base wasn't quite big enough, and I drilled a hole through it. Then I designed and 3D printed a hollow stand, which I was going to use to pull the wires through. Painted the base up, painted the stand up, glued it together, and pulled the wires right through the stand. Now, I gotta really shout out Boylei Hobby Times. He's got an awesome Bowser build, and that's what inspired me to do the fire on my Bowser build. Check his channel out if you haven't seen it, simply amazing. Then I started to wire up the LED filaments. And I used this little straw from a juice box here, and it helped me keep that filament running straight when I placed it in Bowser's mouth. I very carefully soldered the connections together and used some heat sink to cover the joins. And just like that, the straw fit in his mouth. A little test here. Hey, it works! Then I used some glue and some cotton balls and just covered the whole thing in cotton balls to make that smoky look. Again with the airbrush, some yellow and some black just to make it a little more smoky and a little more fiery. Wired Bowser to the base. Soldered connections on the bottom to this little toggle switch. Everything was working, cleaned up my wiring. And then I glued the model to the base, the background to the base, and we were ready to roll. Okay guys, Bowser's all done. Thanks for the help. High five, flip the switch. I gotta say that this was just one of those builds that I managed to pull off even better than I dreamed up.
Love really makes a guy come out of his shell.
I got a ton of cool videos on my channel. Stick around and check them out.